My name's Annika Stitch. I work at Zoho on the field marketing team. We usually do in-person events, but obviously that's not possible right now. So we're hosting these educational webinars, and we saw a big need for some guidance on building your own website, even if you're just using like a drag and drop like builder or template. And for my own personal project, I realized that I had a lot of questions on domain and web hosting, and all of the information that I needed was kind of in all of these different places. And I just want to consolidate everything that I sort of read and watched and learned into one presentation with very little jargon. And yeah, so before I get into this whole presentation about domain and web hosting, I just want to say one, thank you so much for being here. We've put a lot of work into this, and it really means a lot that you're spending your time with us. So thank you. And I also wanted to tell you a little bit about ShowTime, which is the tool that we're using to meet on today. So if you look over on the left side of your screen, there's actually a couple of different things that you can play around with. So one is the questions module. You'll see that over there on the left with a little question mark. And if you have any questions you want answered, I will actually be going over those questions towards the end of my presentation, maybe the last 5 or 10 minutes. And if I don't get to your question that you insert there in the live Q&A, I will actually just go ahead and email you. And then another thing we have over here on the left are these polls. So if you want to participate in the polls, you'll see them pop up on your screen. And those are over there on the left. And then we also have this chat module. And this one's really fun. It's just where you can interact with the other members of the audience. My colleagues will also be monitoring that chat and sharing links there. So if you hear me say, hey, my colleagues are putting this link in the chat, go ahead and check that chat module. And if you all don't mind, go ahead and introduce yourself. Let us know what kind of industry you're in, and maybe like what you had for breakfast or something like that, just to kind of get the ball rolling on the chat. Go ahead and say hi. And then another thing that we have over here on the left is this handy handouts module. And that's where I actually put in a resource that has like a lot of the research that I did for this presentation, some useful articles that I liked, and also some links to other resources that people at Zoho have written about, just like building your website and all that kind of thing. So that was just a brief view of ShowTime. I also wanted to let you know that if you have any sort of technical difficulties, what you're going to want to do is just refresh your page. I promise you 99% of the time that will solve the issue. So if there's a lag or if you can't hear me or something like that, just try refreshing your page, and that should usually help. Thank you, Jeffrey, for participating in the chat. And thank you, Ashanka, for also participating in the chat. If anybody else wants to say like, hi, good morning, what kind of industry you're in, go ahead and put that over there in the chat on the left. And like I said before, my colleagues will be monitoring that. Okay, so if you've never heard of Zoho before, that's totally okay. Hi, welcome. I work on their field marketing team. If you missed that, I'm just going to give you a quick overview about Zoho. This is not going to be like a demo or anything. We're only going to be going over domain and web hosting, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of background if you've never heard of us before. So we are a software as a service company, and we've been in the industry for about 24 years, since 1996. We have a headquarters in Austin, Texas. We have one in Pleasanton, California, near San Francisco. We also have a huge office in Chennai, India, and multiple offices globally. We have over 8,000 employees. We have over 50 different business software applications. We're present in over 200 countries. We have over 45 million users worldwide. And we're private, bootstrapped, and profitable. That last one's really rare for a tech company, so I do like to point it out. We don't take any outside funding, and that means that if you're using one of the free versions of our applications, you are not going to see any ads. We don't sell your data or anything like that. We're very secure. We're very big on privacy, and that's just a little bit about Zoho. I also promised you a series introduction, so let me just quickly introduce that. We're doing a whole campaign, so we have like 4 more weeks of these educational webinars. It's a free educational series on running your small business. We have workbooks, we have handouts like you can find in that handouts module. And then coming soon, we'll have like quizzes and assessments hosted on that landing page. So I hope you'll join us for the rest of the Business Website Basics series. And you can find our landing page at this URL over here at this bottom bullet point. And my colleagues, Mallory, Tyler, and Emily, one of them will go ahead and put that in the chat for you as well. So you can go ahead and click that, open it up, maybe bookmark it, and you can see kind of what's coming up next. So if you did open that landing page up, what you're going to see is all of these other sessions we have coming up until September 23rd. And then we're going to have, more series after this. So keep an eye on the chat to see that landing page. And again, any technical difficulties, go ahead and refresh. And now I'm going to go ahead and jump into the presentation. So the main takeaways I want you to have from this are the difference between domain and web hosting, best practices for choosing a domain name, how to register and purchase a domain, and then also the web host option. So what's best for your business? If that sounds like a bunch of stuff that you want to learn, please stick around. And like I said, I wanted to have this not be super jargony, so I did write some definitions down. They're really simplified versions. They're not like, they're a little imprecise, but they work for what we're talking about. So the first one is domain name, zoho.com, hotels.com, asos.com, ca.gov, all that kind of stuff. That's just the address to get to a website. And even that .com, .gov, that's part of the domain name as well. It's called a top-level domain, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then SEO. So if you're not familiar with SEO, it stands for search engine optimization. I'm sure you've seen that term floating around, and I'm going to give you an example of what search engine optimization can actually be. So it is the process used to generate high quality website traffic by increasing visibility of a website. So if you're using a search engine, you're going to put in some keywords into Google maybe, and the keywords here are buy MMA gear online, and it's going to generate for you some organic search results. So these are not ads, and these are really important to have good search engine optimization because 80% of people using Google don't check the second page of Google results. So you want to make sure that you are working with search engines to make sure that your pages are visible. And my colleague Mallory will actually be going over this a little bit more in her session next week if you're interested. And now I'm going to move into one of our key takeaways that I mentioned, which is the difference between domain hosting and web hosting. So they're really closely related, but they're actually two completely different services. So a lot of companies will offer one or the other, and then there are plenty of companies that offer both, but they are two different services. You can buy them separately, you can buy them together. But to kind of conceptualize this for you, I have the metaphor of the street address and the house. So if the domain name is the address of your house, then the web hosting is the actual house that that address points to. So that 237 Garden Street, you can think of that as like the domain, the address, right? And then the house, you can think of that as the actual content on your website that has like all of your copy and your graphics and things like that. So the domain name is just pointing to that website. So domain hosts provide domain names, which helps visitors access your web content. So we can see the domain was purchased from a registrar. That's a karencrow.com. It's one of our examples that was built on Zoho Commerce. And then we have, of course, the web host, which allows users to create and store content like a website on internet servers. So your content is hosted online, and that's your website. And so that's the difference between domain hosting and web hosting, two different services, but you can buy them from the same company if you would like to. So when I was writing this presentation, I was also simultaneously working on like my own personal project where I needed to register a domain and I needed to buy web hosting. And what really helped me is actually just knowing the steps for that, like knowing what I needed to do step by step. So I wanted to provide those steps for you just in case it makes it a little less overwhelming for you. So first, choose your domain name. I've got some tips for that. Then you're going to want to purchase and register that domain name. Then purchase web hosting. And like I said, you can purchase your domain name and you can purchase your web hosting from the same company if you would like to. Then you're going to link your domain to your web host. And this is actually a step that you can skip if you buy both of the domain name and the web hosting from the same company. And then after that, you're going to go ahead and start building your website and driving traffic to the site. And this last step is something that my colleagues will actually be going over in the coming weeks. So stay tuned if you'd like to see theirs. So now that I've sort of outlined the steps for you, what I'm going to do is explain why your domain name is even important. Why am I even talking about this? So what I would like to say is that it's your first impression of your business or your organization. It gives you some credibility, and it also shows that you are up to date. So if maybe if you're getting online for the first time, or your company or your organization is getting online for the first time, or just in general, you want to make sure that at every point you possibly can, your company looks as professional as it is. So that means not using a generic domain name, which I see still today companies doing. So you can inspire confidence in a customer or a lead by buying a custom domain name and then proving to them that you're offering something of value. So don't go generic. Don't get like a .zoho sites or a .wordpress.com or something from your internet service provider. Go ahead and put in the extra money to just get your own custom domain name. It really pays off in the long run. And to me, coming at this as like a consumer, I'm thinking like, hey, if you won't even register an appropriate domain name, I'm going to wonder like what other corners you're cutting, right? But the question now becomes, how do I choose a domain name? This is super important, right? You can build your whole brand around this domain. And so one of the questions I like to start off with after like when I'm trying to figure out, well, what should I even call this? Is one thing that helps me is knowing whether I want my domain name to be discoverable or brandable. And this is like a good jumping off point if you need to sort of narrow things down, especially if you're brainstorming with other people. So the difference between those, I'll explain them. So something discoverable would be like dictionary.com or MMAgearaddict.com has some discoverable keywords. So that just means like, for example, I talked about keywords and using them in the search engine. If somebody were to type in the keywords online dictionary, one of the first results that they'll see, or that's something that's on the first page of Google, is actually going to be dictionary.com. So it's very discoverable. It has that keyword that people are searching for. Same thing with MMA gear. Those are two keywords. And if somebody types in buy MMA gear online, because this domain name is discoverable and it has those sought after keywords in it, people are going to be able to find that business more easily. And then something brandable is just as valid as using something discoverable, right? So this person used KarenCrow.com. That's just a first name, last name.com. I see a lot of like marketing consultants doing this. And then we also have the examples of Google and Etsy here, which are, nonsense words, but now they have meaning because these companies have built brands around those words. So that's just a good jumping off point for you if you're having trouble figuring out, what do I want to actually call my domain? So I have some other tips for you that kind of tie into being discoverable versus being brandable. So let me give you those tips. You're going to want to choose the right domain name extension. That's that .com, .net, .org, just depending on what kind of business or organization you have. And my recommendation is that if you are a business, especially if you're doing like e-commerce or something like that, go ahead and just pay the extra money for that .com. It's typically like slightly more expensive than buying, like a .me or something more generic, but it's a good top level domain to have because it's the default. So nobody's going to have to second guess themselves if they're typing that in because it's the default. Another tip I have is to be unique, but make sure that people can spell your domain. So I follow an entrepreneur on YouTube. She's very successful. And she was actually talking about one of her first entrepreneurial endeavors, which she still runs today, called Genre Vein. It's a online boutique. And she said that one of her regrets was actually building a brand around this word genre vein, because it's not easy to spell. People don't know how to spell it right off the bat when she tells them it, in person. So you want to make sure that you kind of show your domain to somebody and say like, hey, can you read this out loud for me? Like, what does this say? Especially if you're getting those word of mouth referrals, that's going to be super important. So make it short, make it memorable, make it easy to type, no hyphens, no numbers, all that good stuff. And an example of that would be like, hotels.com is really short. It's to the point, it's discoverable. And then to that point, I also want to say, don't keyword stuff. We talked about dictionary.com and MMAgearaddict.com being, having some keywords in them so that they are discoverable, but you don't want to overstuff your domain name. And what I mean by that is, for example, if you're an attorney and you have you work in elder law, keyword stuffing your domain name would look like you saying elder law attorney for conservatorships and estate planning.com. That's super keyword stuffed. Google will deprioritize you and it will move your page farther back in the pages of their search engine, because they know that you're not most likely providing quality content, and they want to put that quality content up in front of people who are searching for that content. So don't keyword stuff. Okay, and so those are my tips for choosing your domain name. I hope maybe you have a pen and a pencil and you're taking some notes and things like that. I have some other things for you to consider when you're actually choosing your domain registrar. So now that you have your name, hopefully you have like some ideas in your mind, and you can kind of start crossing them off the list. Now I want to give you some tips for choosing an actual registrar. So who are you going to buy this domain name from? So let me give you some tips for that. One thing I want to say is you're going to want to compare your first year prices and renewal prices. So the first year prices oftentimes will be a little bit cheaper because they're kind of trying to rope you in. And the renewal prices may be a lot more expensive than that first year price. So go ahead and check that. Check their policies in case you think you might want to switch registrars later. So if your priority right now is like, hey, I just need to get online. I want to do this as fast as possible. Time is ticking. We know we're not making any sales in brick and mortar anymore because of the pandemic and all that kind of thing. Check their policies if it's the only thing that you check, just because they may lock you in and you don't want to be stuck with a registrar that you don't like. Also check the expiration grace period. And what that means is, if you are on auto pay, you don't even need to think about this. But if you're not, if you're like, okay, a year from now, I will have to pay this manually, you don't want someone else to buy that domain out from under you. A lot of times these expiration grace periods are really generous. So that doesn't tend to happen, but it's something to keep in mind. Another thing is to check prices for add-on services, right? Just a quick note on that, and I'll get into that a little bit just right after this. And then, of course, look for reviews on registrar's user experience. This is super duper important, especially if you're not like super tech savvy or something like that, because you want to look at this because it'll make it easier for you to change any settings, and you want to have that be like the most painless experience as possible. And then last thing, anytime you're paying money for anything, check the fees. Check the fees for that. Okay. And now I was going to talk about the add-ons provided by domain registrars. Like I said, you're going to want to check those prices over there on that fourth bullet point. So let me get into that a little bit. So I wanted to test out buying a domain from like a couple different registrars, and I noticed they also had some add-ons. So I bought the full domain privacy and protection, and I'll get into what that means right after this. And they also had this websites and marketing starter kit. Shop around for this because I think both of these are a little overpriced, and you'll see the term here is it's a year for all of them. And I wanted to give you a quick note on what that privacy means. So you saw in that add-on service, I added like a $10 privacy protection thing. This is super important if you are having like a business that uses your home address. Basically, anybody who has your domain name can look up that domain on this Whois lookup site and put in your domain name here. And then if they search it, they can see your whole address, your name, your phone number, all that kind of stuff. So you do want to make sure you pay for that. I have a friend who builds websites for a living, and she says she always pays for this for her clients. You just want to set yourself up for success and also for safety. So just a quick note on that. And you can find it cheaper than $10 for sure. And then another thing I wanted to show you about these domain names is the price range for registering a new domain name. I've seen these for super cheap. I've seen them for like $3, but usually they're between 10 and 20. You can also buy like exorbitantly priced domain names, like those really sought after domain names with like keywords in them and all that kind of thing. You can find them for like thousands of dollars, but generally it's going to be between $10 and $20. I will say that the .com and the .org top level domains will generally be slightly more expensive, but I think it is worth it to have those sort of like default top level domains instead of like a .me or something generic. So a lot of web hosts or domain registrars will actually offer like a free generic domain. Just pay for the custom one. If you're like a serious business owner, this isn't for like some fun project or something. Not that your business isn't a fun project, but you get what I'm saying. Just go ahead and pay the extra money for the .com or the .org or what have you. And now I'm going to swing back into our steps to show you kind of what we did and where we are going. So we chose our domain name, gave you some notes for that. Hopefully it helped you narrow that down. You purchased and registered your domain name. And now you're going to purchase web hosting. So like I said, you can purchase your domain name and web hosting from the same company, even though they're two different services. And that way you don't have to link your domain to your web host if you're not super tech savvy. But I want to give you some advice on like how to choose a web host. That way that when you begin building your website and driving traffic to that site, it's as easy as possible for you to do so. So just a quick review, what is web hosting? Easy peasy, right? It makes your website available online. And this is the step where an app like Zoho Sites or Zoho Commerce would come in. Similar sites to those would be like Squarespace, Wix, Shopify, things like that. So those also provide, as they have templates and stuff, but then they also have web hosting for you with some variety, right? So this brings us to the question, like I said in those steps, you can buy your web hosting and your domain from the same company, but should you? So this is a question that I had when I was going through this whole process, so I anticipate that you'll have it as well. The question is, should I host my website with my domain registrar? And the answer to that is, it depends, which is not a very fun answer when you just want something clear cut. But let me give you some things to consider to sort of like guide you in the right direction and what's right for you specifically. So you're going to want to, one, consider price. Sometimes when you bundle them, they can be cheaper together. You also need to think about kind of like how comfortable you are connecting your domain to your web host. Like I said, if you buy these services from the same provider, you won't have to link them together. I'm not super tech savvy, and it was easy for me to connect my domain to my web host. I thought you go into the DNS settings, you copy paste. It's pretty simple, but if that is overwhelming to you, that is totally valid. You can just buy them together and save yourself a little bit of a headache. Also think about your long-term plans, right? So what I mean by that is not every web host supports every domain. So if you are thinking like you need to expand, maybe you're doing some sort of global expansion where you need a domain that's like .it or .ru or something like that, not every web host is going to support those like international domains. So just think about your long-term plans. And then finally, do you like what the web host offers? And one note that I would really like to highlight here is that the domain name market is regulated, but the web host market is not. And so what that means is that there's a lot of variety in the web host market. Your mileage may really vary. So you're going to go ahead and need to do a trial, watch some demos, things like that. And I will reiterate that again because it is super important. Okay, so once you've decided on this, you can move on to choosing a web host, right? And I want to give you some things to consider for that. So one thing that you will need to consider is what kind of hosting you need. Will you need shared hosting or will you need dedicated hosting? And I will get into the differences between those in just a second. Another thing, points 2 and 3 kind of go together. You need to consider scalability. So you need to think about what kind of storage you need. Are you busier during one part of the year than another? Maybe you're super busy around Mother's Day, so you need a lot of bandwidth and storage around that time of year. You're also going to want to see if your web host offers customer support 24/7. That may be super important to you. It's super important to me. So that's going to be something you want to check. And then last but certainly not least is, do you need to comply with certain security standards? I will set you up for success and say, yes, you do. So, a lot of web hosts have SSL certificates that they sell for you. Want to make sure your stuff is encrypted, make sure that it's safe for you and your consumers. And then also, if GDPR compliance is important to you, which I hope it is, you're going to want to make sure that your web host is GDPR compliant as well. So now as we move into more about web hosts and what kind of hosting you need, I actually do need to explain a couple terms before we move on. Like I said, I didn't want this to be super jargon heavy, so I want to make sure that I do a good job of explaining. So the 2 terms that I want to get into before we talk about the types of hosting that might be right for you are these terms uptime and bandwidth. So uptime describes how reliable a server is. So that means 100% uptime means your website is up and running online 100% of the time. That means that 0% of the time, if 100% uptime means your website is up and running online 100% of the time, that means your website has 0% downtime. So there's uptime and then there's downtime. Uptime means your site is perfect. Downtime means nobody's getting on your site. So you want to make sure you have 100% uptime, right? And then bandwidth. So in part, bandwidth describes how much traffic your website can handle at any given time. And so both of these terms are super important to understand what kind of hosting you need. And when you're comparing different web hosts, these things are important to know about. So the types of hosting I have here, shared hosting, there's a bunch of different types. I'm going over 3 that I know best. Types of hosting, one is shared hosting. So it's a single server shared by multiple users. It's affordable. It's easy to upgrade. What I like to use to describe this is like a roommate sort of metaphor. So you may have 3 roommates, but not all of them are home 100% of the time. And the location is great and the rent is cheap because you have roommates. So that's kind of what shared hosting is. No one is using 100% of their allotted bandwidth 100% of the time. So you should have pretty good uptime on shared hosting. If you're kind of just doing if you're maybe a solopreneur or you have a smaller business that doesn't need a ton of bandwidth 100% of the time, shared hosting is usually a pretty good option for you. Then we have dedicated hosting. It's your very own server. This does require some IT knowledge and it is more expensive. So that's something to consider. But if you need a ton of bandwidth and you're a large company, for example, you're going to maybe want to get your dedicated hosting. I did want to say that in regards to uptime, like I said, the web host market is unregulated. So when you're comparing these things, just remember that they can kind of say whatever. If you're noticing downtime on your site and they said it's going to be 99.9% uptime, which a lot of web hosts say they have, but you're noticing downtime, do yourself a favor and just switch. They can say whatever they want, but if you're seeing it, go ahead and just switch. It's it'll save you heartache in the long run, I think. And then the last type of hosting that I will go over, even though there are a couple different other types, is cloud hosting. And this is like the best of both worlds. You pay for the resources you use, it's scalable, and it's secure. So like I said, it's secure. And what I mean by that is it is kind of being hosted on multiple different servers. So you're never going to like lose your data or things like that. Pardon me. So those are some different types of hosting. If you're curious, Zoho is all on the cloud. So we do use cloud hosting. So it's still pretty affordable. It's very scalable. It's very secure. But shared hosting and dedicated hosting are obviously two very good options as well. And now that I've kind of given you the tools you need and the information you need to make these educated decisions for yourself and for your organization, I'm going to go back to the steps and say, like, what have we done so far? So we've chosen our domain name. We have purchased and registered our domain name. We've purchased our web hosting, linked domain to the web host. Super easy. I'm not going to show you that because it's different for every domain and web host like combo, but it's not super hard. It's copy pasting. You should be able to do it. And then begin building website or driving traffic to that site. And that's what my colleagues will be going over in the coming weeks. So I do have some final notes for you. One is to sign up for a demo. Sign up for a demo of whatever web host you are hoping to use. Or if you can't do that for something, go ahead and read and watch reviews. You just want to set yourself up for success. Obviously, you're doing your due diligence by watching this webinar, so I know that you'll be doing this anyway. And lastly, sign up for a trial if you can. That way you're really going to see if you like the templates. If you're using a drag and drop builder like Sites or like Commerce, sign up for a trial so that you can actually see if you like the user interface. And then my actual final note, the final note is this. Get online. If your organization or your company is not online yet, get online. You don't have to wait for it to be perfect. You can always change it later. And you've obviously done your homework. So it's going to be okay. You just go ahead and you get online. Okay. Now, again, I'm going to go over these next steps, which are, we have more webinars just like this, very educational. I'll have one of my colleagues to put this link in the chat so you can go ahead and see our landing page. If you are interested in any of the subjects coming up next, go ahead and go to that landing page and check us out. We have all of this coming up in the next few weeks. So I hope you'll join Mallory next week for establishing brand story and voice. If you need content, you've set up your website now, and now you need to put some content on it. She can help you write really good content. And she's going to give you all the sort of guidelines to do that next week, same time, same day.